discovery, empathy, design, prioritization, and critique. These categories generally sort of follow what's known as like the life cycle of the design process. So almost any design project is going to start with discovery. The Nielsen-Norman Group, which is sort of like a long-time, very highly respected online resource for UX designers, highly recommend it if you've never seen it, has kind of broken down workshops into these 5 different categories: discovery, empathy, design, prioritization, and critique. These categories generally sort of follow what's known as like the life cycle of the design process. So almost any design project is going to start with discovery, whether you're designing a poster for a rock concert, or new features for an existing app, or trying to maybe brainstorm your way into a new market, you're always going to start with discovery. It's really just a fancy word for research. So you want to get people together, kind of figure out what everybody knows, whether it's something about the customer, whether it's something about like whatever their area of expertise is. You want them to talk about that with you, with other people involved in the project, so everybody kind of has an understanding of like why that person is in the room. It's a good way to build consensus. It's a good way to build empathy. Maybe there's somebody on your team that you're kind of always like butting heads with. Having a good conversation at the beginning of a process or a beginning of a project with that person can be a really great way to kind of ground your interactions moving forward, so that you have, you know what to go to them for, like when you need information. That's a great sort of element of the discovery workshop. The next sort of step is, once you've kind of figured out why everybody's in the room, is to do an empathy workshop. That's sort of the next phase of the design life cycle. So with empathy, that's really where you start talking to your customer base. You start talking to your users. You want to figure out either maybe generative information, so like where are there opportunities, talking to people who are maybe already like your sense of who the prime customer is, sort of figuring out like how they're already doing a process with existing tools, so you can look for like holes or opportunities in their needs. Or if you have like an existing product, then going out there and running a usability test to kind of figure out like what is their actual lived experience with your product. That's really crucial. An empathy workshop is really just a way to gather data. It's a way to figure out why people are doing what they're doing and sort of have a better understanding of who you're creating for, whether you're designing or you're working on a marketing plan or you're trying to improve your IT processes. All of that is dependent on like how that process or that information is bubbling up to impact the user experience. Once you have a good sense of your user, then you can kind of start the actual design process. And so this is where you're really generating ideas, kind of figuring out how those ideas will manifest themselves in your final product. So if you're doing an e-commerce site and you're kind of trying to figure out like, what is the hook on our homepage that's going to push the customer to the next step of the e-commerce, the next step into the conversion, basically. You can use a design workshop to brainstorm a lot of ideas about how that homepage maybe should look, and then kind of start to develop potential solutions to those ideas. Prioritization is a workshop that's a little bit better when you have sort of the ball already moving. So maybe you've got some user information, you've got like a backlog of things that you've been trying to work on, and you're sort of figuring out like what is the next thing that we need to tackle. Oftentimes what I have found is that what you think is supposed to be the priority maybe isn't the best priority. So it's even like a good chance to gut check whether your perspective on a situation is going to be like the most effective or have the most business value in the next 2 to 6 months, right? You can only do so much in the course of a year. And then lastly is critique. And so that's a good opportunity to kind of take a look at what your product is already doing, or take a look at maybe you have some ideas that are in development, and then you can run a critique workshop to get some feedback on those and improve them.
These workshops, they can be applied to established companies and established businesses, or are they for new efforts only?
Both. Definitely both. So oftentimes with new efforts, you have like lots of big ideas sort of floating around out in the, you're talking to people, you're getting information, and a workshop can ground you. So it's a really great way to kind of develop that path forward, to get that vision sort of centered so that everybody has the same vision, which is really important. Even if it's a very small team, you've never worked together before, you don't quite have a product on the market, you can kind of pull all that stuff out of the air, document the decisions that are happening through the conversations in the workshop, and then sort of figure out how to move forward and what to focus on. Obviously, focusing, kind of having a lean product approach is really important when you're a new organization. If you're an existing organization, workshops are great through working through some of like the political blocks that come in larger organizations. It's great for breaking down silos. In user experience and information architecture, people talk a lot about siloing in organizations. So you might even have a team that's working on a particular project in a different part of the organization that you could learn from, and you're not even talking to that team because you're like over here. And so I think workshops are great in those situations for getting information that's like floating around the organization into like one place, having conversations with people whose expertise may be very different from yours, and getting a better understanding of the organization so that that user is really at the core of everything that people are doing.
You said something that triggered a thought in my head. When, building workshops and bringing people from different teams is always difficult. Digital workshops will actually simplify this process, right? People, you could have teams that are participating in the workshops, and then you also have members of the same team that are just listening in, right? And being attentive. So you could actually have a workshop, a webinar of a workshop.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
You can have an audience of how these decisions are being made. Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, generally workshops need to be contained with how many, decision makers are there. And, usually we like to keep it at like 5 to 7 top participants. Yeah. But usually if you have 7 people in a room, running thoughts and decisions and, running questions, the rest of the companies, the rest of the organizations don't really know how that process is happening. So I think with the move into digital, you can actually create an audience, right? A webinar of seeing how the thought process is happening, and potentially, crowdsourced input.
Yeah, it's great for transparency. You can have like lots of people in the room. I think it breaks down a lot of hierarchical silos as well, because you can use things like dot voting, where everybody's, when you're weighing in on designs or ideas that people have put forward, everybody's vote is equal. So it's a little bit harder. Like when you actually have maybe an executive or a senior team member in the room, people can be very differential. And when you're doing something online, it sort of evens out that playing field a little bit, which I think is really critical for the design process. Executives are super important, of course, like they're great for setting forth the strategy and the vision of the organization, but oftentimes the people who are sort of working on the front lines or at the ground level have really incredible amounts of expertise that's just not being shared widely. And doing an online workshop is a great way to tap into that resource.
Let's make history. Let's change.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love it. I mean, the best managers I've ever had were people that were my advocates and, soundboards for my ideas and meetings that I wouldn't necessarily have been present in. But, as the interaction designer on a project, like I'm ultimately responsible for like where the buttons are being placed. And sometimes a button can be part of a larger strategic decision, and you want to be able to weigh in on that even if you're not in the room, or you want to be able to have your perspective represented. And so I think that's kind of a nice,
It's super important. Like even, I don't think a lot of stakeholders understand the importance of these micro decisions or macro decisions, because, the designers and the UX people are so close to the product, and, somebody could say it's just a button. What that button is, it's the key to where the user journey takes you further, right? And sometimes, the 2 millimeter rule, right? Moving just by 2 millimeters off, you could make a drastic difference in the user journey.
Yeah.
So I definitely agree with you that this type of input is super important. I think, digital collaboration will help us expand on it.
Yeah. And a lot of times too, you're competing with another team for like the same page space, or like you've got multiple priorities happening on a single web page. And so having a workshop around that can help you understand maybe like where the marketing team is coming from or where the IT team is coming from. So you get a better sense of like what the business requirements are. Obviously, as the UX designer, your responsibility is to advocate for the user requirements. Like what is the user's mindset? What are the things that they want to get done on this page? Like what is this like a tool for the user to accomplish? How are you creating progress in their life? Even with e-commerce, like people buy things because they have a need. They're trying to get something done. They want to, there's always a motivation there, and it's your responsibility as the user experience designer to represent that motivation in these conversations when you're starting to develop a project. And online workshops are a really great way to come into the room and say, like, I'm representing the user. This is what I think that they, or my research has shown that this particular user is trying to get done. And then you have marketing coming in and they're saying, yes, but also like we have this new initiative, we need to spread the word about it. And so you have a really safe, playful space to come up with ideas where you can collaborate and build requirements that will make everybody happy, and you're finding that like sweet spot. So we talked a little bit about like the life cycle of the design process. So all of these 5 different types of workshops, there's kind of a time and a place and when to use them. And that's something that if you're, wanting us to come in and run a digital workshop, we, in our early conversations about what your goals are, will sort of help you surface of like, what is the right type of workshop for you? Where are you in this process? So that we can have like the most effective outcomes, things that will be really actionable immediately following the workshop, and you'll understand like where you're going to be going over the next week or 2 weeks as you move forward with the outcomes that we've sort of developed from the process of collaboration in this space.
Essentially, when you're doing a big digital transformation, it's great to dive into all 5. So this becomes a full-blown user experience workshop, which you could hit up a lot of sectors. But if you're an established business and you're making incremental changes or incremental improvements or smaller projects, you can pick and choose which one you truly need. You don't need to have all 5, but very often the discovery and the empathy workshops are huge. The design workshop are very kind of a tactical approach, right? When you talk to a strategic team and then you need a tactical approach to a design, that would come in great. The critique approach is when, if there is obviously certain products being released or certain designs being released that there's disagreements very often between UX and marketing teams, right? There's disagreement. Everybody's pushing their agenda, so would be a great for critique. And prioritization is, if you're launching multiple products at the same time or multiple efforts at the same time, you could definitely utilize the prioritization workshop to get things in order.
Yeah, exactly. Get everybody on the same page about what you're going to work on next. That's exactly right. These 5 different types of workshops actually align really closely with like the Google Design Sprint process. And so if you were doing something like a Google Design Sprint, that's like a Monday through Friday, all day long. You're really like grinding for a full week of working through all of these. But it can all be kind of adjusted and curated in such a way that you can cherry pick different components, or you can package it all and do it one day after another, all online for like 3 hours in the afternoon. It's one of the wonderful things about design workshops is they're supremely modular. So there's a lot of different ways that you can shape it to meet your needs. And, that's one of the things that Yuri and I are really great at, is that we can kind of come in and have a really simple conversation and then come back and present to you what would be the best approach for your particular circumstance.